Historians of Reddit, what's a devastating event that no one talks about? Baghdad used to be one of the biggest and most vibrant cities in the world in the 1200s. Until the Mongols came, Baghdad did not recover its year 1200 population until the 1980s. Holy fuck, what? It was, in fact, the most populous city in the world for quite some time during the Middle Ages. It was also the epicenter of intellectual, cultural, and artistic exchange for scholars and other brilliant thinkers the world over. And then, of course, the Mongols came. The Andijin massacre of 2005 in Uzbekistan. It is largest mass shooting in Asia since Tiananmen Square, with over 1,000 killed and even more wounded. The Uzbek government forcefully silenced reform protests by firing into the crowd and then kicked out 90% of Westerners in the country when the US-governed UN tried to investigate. Terrible loss of life that rarely gets remembered because the Uzbek government tried so hard to cover it up. Uzbek here. Deleted. Taiping Heavenly Kingdom of Hongshochuan. Put simply, it was an usurped kingdom in 1850s China that directly and indirectly led to the deaths of millions, maybe 10 million plus, of people through massacre and famine. Hongshochuan believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ and persuaded enough people to follow along and start a civil war. Check out God's Chinese Son by Jonathan Spence. 10 million combatants, could be as many as double that when counting civilian deaths. In only 14 years, the entire period of Qing collapse would fit this thread tbh. So much of it is batshit insane and tragic. The Taiping Rebellion is one of the most extraordinary events in human history that is virtually unheard of in the West. Perhaps as many as 70 million people died in the conflict. The Taipings were truly revolutionary, as they demanded absolute equality between women and men. When they conquered a city, they would give the inhabitants a choice to join them or die. Those that chose not to join were killed, all of them. The conflict lasted for 21 years, 1850 to 1871, and may be the second deadliest war in the human history. Literally no one knows about it. Cambodian genocide. They killed so many kids that the life expectancy was 18. A not-so-fun fact, the Khmer Rouge insisted their soldiers killed them with only blunt instruments as they wanted to make sure they saved money on ammunition, so no guns. So the executions were needlessly painful and drawn out, just to add some extra pain to the situation. My friend's mom survived the genocide by hiding in corpse piles during daytime to avoid patrols, and traveling only at night. That's as much as she'll share with anyone because of how traumatic it was. Another friend's dad was an AVRN ranger trained by the USSF/RGR, and after escaping a POW camp at the end of the Vietnam War, himself and several other soldiers helped ferry Cambodian refugees into Thailand, while waging guerrilla warfare on the Khmer Rouge along the way. He said the killing fields was worse than anything he saw fighting in his home of Vietnam. I don't know if this was part of a larger organized effort, or an isolated incident of a small band of soldiers who wanted to do something heroic. I can't verify if these things actually happened or the story simply hasn't been told yet, since I can't find any historic writings about it to back up his story. I'm not really a proper historian, but I feel the need to mention the Bronze Age collapse. It's not as though nobody talks about it at all, but considering how catastrophic it was, it doesn't get nearly enough attention. At this time civilizations were still pretty scarce, but the Eastern Mediterranean was full of them. We can't pinpoint an exact reason, but at some point it all fell apart. The Mycenaeans? Gone. The Hittites? Gone. The Minoans? Gone. The Egyptians? Barely clinging on and having serious problems. There are many things that happened around that time in that general area that could be the culprit: volcanoes, earthquakes, drought, famine, war and invasions from foreigners that came by boat that historians have named the Sea People because we have basically no idea where they came from. In reality, it was probably a combination of some or even all of them. Again, I'm not a proper historian by any means, but this is what I heard. Actual historians, feel free to correct any mistakes or mention something I missed. The Hittites are especially interesting since we had no hard evidence for them till the 19th century. The only mention of them was the Bible, and people thought there was no way a nation as powerful as described could just up and vanish, so it had to be mythological. The lo and behold big old Bronze Age empire. It's crazy how a geological event forcing a whole culture to flee further and further south from their homeland completely rewrote history. I've been watching a lot of documentaries leading up to and including the fall of the Bronze Age, and it's honestly just mind-blowing. The year 536 marked the beginning of a very bad time period. Basically several natural disasters and social upheaval abso-fucking-lutely devastated multiple societies. It's thought that a volcanic eruption blocked out enough sun to cause crop failures across Europe and as far as China. While this was happening, terrible plagues were also afflicting the Middle East. Economies everywhere fell to ruin and stagnation in the years that followed because several other eruptions later made things worse. Just makes me wonder when a big volcano like Krakatoa is going to pop off again. There's so many that I would go with, that will probably be mentioned in other comments, but I think any stories about workers in the early 1900s are pretty horrible. Radium Girls is a pretty horrible event, for example. After being told that the paint was harmless, the women in each facility ingested deadly amounts of radium after being instructed to point their brushes on their lips in order to give them a fine tip. Some also painted their fingernails, face and teeth with the glowing substance. The women were instructed to point their brushes in this way because using rags or a water rinse caused them to use more time and material, as the rinse was made from powdered radium, gum arabic and water. Many women died and became sick with horrendous diseases. One woman named Molly Maggie had her jawbone crumble. You can read about that here by May. Her dentist thought Molly needed surgery to remove a fast-growing abscess he'd found on her jaw. When he got the gums open, the bone didn't look right as it was too ashy and grey, so he gently prodded it with his finger. To his shock and horror, the whole bone crumbled under his fingertip like ashes in a fireplace. Instead of removing a tumor, he wound up digging Molly's entire left jaw out with nothing but his fingers. Unbeknownst to him, the radium had perforated the bone cells and stripped them of calcium. It had, like a little machine gun, shredded the collagen inside the bone and left it as little more than a pile of splinters. There's also a great book on this called The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore. This whole story is extremely depressing. Work in the 1800s and early 1900s was pretty horrible for a lot of women, men and children. Wenches, female miners in the 19th century, you can look that up, children in chimney sweeps etc. I've read the book, it's just horrifying. The worst part, for me, was during one of the trials. A doctor was testifying, reading the medical records of one patient, and came to the end where he said the prognosis was terminal. Suddenly someone started screaming. It was the woman whose medical records were being read. None of the doctors had told her she was dying, so that's how she found out. This whole story is just so sad. And the saddest part is that these women were literally fighting for compensation on their deathbeds, and only a few received justice before they died. Talk about manipulating vulnerable people into doing your dirty work. There's a movie coming about it soon with Joey King. Galveston, Texas was once considered to be one of the most important commercial ports in the United States and was referred to by several fantastical names such as the Queen City of the Gulf and the Wall Street of the West. All that changed when it suffered a near-direct hit from a devastating Category 4 hurricane in 1900, the deadliest natural disaster in American history. Pretty much the entire city was destroyed by a storm surge, and anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 people died. Galveston was rebuilt, but it never truly regained its status. Houston became the state's commercial center in the storm's wake, in addition to other factors. There's a great book about this called Isaac's Storm by Eric Larson. I remember watching a documentary on this in school. There was one guy who could tell there was a storm coming. He tried to warn people, but not a lot of people believed him, and there wasn't enough time to evacuate the whole city by then. Subscribe for more hot Reddit takes in your inbox, guaranteed.